Imagine this for a second. You're walking down a random street in 1985, and suddenly, a car passes by that looks like nothing you've ever seen before. It's not massive like the ones from the 70s. It's not covered in chrome, and it's not trying to be classic. It's low, angular, futuristic. It almost feels out of place. And that's exactly the feeling that defined the 1980s, because this was an uncomfortable decade for American design, a transitional era where the old rules no longer worked, but the new ones weren't fully figured out yet. Many manufacturers got lost trying, but some got it exactly right. They created cars with such a strong identity that even today, decades later, they still turn heads like they just rolled off the showroom floor, and that's exactly why they became unforgettable. In this video, we're gonna take a look at the most beautiful American cars of the 1980s. And trust me, some of them don't look the way you'd expect. Let's begin. 1987, Pontiac Firebird Trans Am GTA. This car didn't try to be subtle. It didn't try to be elegant. It tried to be striking, and it achieved that from the very first second. Visually, the GTA was pure 1980s language. The low body, sharp lines, aerodynamic details, and that aggressive front end created a presence that looked built for speed even while standing still. This was the kind of car that never went unnoticed. Never. But beyond its appearance, it also had something to back it up. Real performance. Under the hood, it carried a 5.7-liter V8, producing around 210 to 225 horsepower, depending on the configuration. It wasn't the most extreme muscle car ever built, but it was one of the most balanced of its time. Powerful, but also manageable. It could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6.5 seconds. A very respectable figure for the late 1980s. And that's what made it so interesting, because the GTA wasn't just a flashy car. It was a car that delivered. It also had something that many cars on this list share: cultural presence. This generation of Firebird became a symbol of its era, appearing in movies, TV shows, and becoming part of the visual identity of an entire generation. Today, a well-kept 1987 Pontiac Trans Am GTA typically sells between $20,000 and $45,000, with exceptional examples reaching even higher values. And now, I want to hear your opinion. Out of the last three cars we've seen, the elegant Lincoln Mark VI, the futuristic Toronado Trofeo, and the aggressive Trans Am GTA, which one do you find the most interesting? Let me know in the comments. 1989 Chrysler TC by Maserati. And now the list takes another unexpected turn. Because if the Trans Am represented American attitude in its purest form, the next car is something completely different: a collaboration. The name alone already says a lot, because this wasn't just any Chrysler. It was the result of a partnership between an American brand and one of the most recognized names in Italian design. And you can see it. Visually, it takes a much more refined, elegant approach, with smooth lines and proportions that feel closer to a European car than a typical American model from the 1980s. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't over the top. It was restrained. But that restraint is exactly what made it stand out in the US market. The clean front end, the attention to detail, and the compact profile created a car that felt designed for a very specific kind of buyer, someone looking for something different, something more exclusive. Inside, that same feeling continued. High-quality materials, more detailed finishes than what was typical for Chrysler, and a clear intention to deliver a more European-style luxury experience. This was a car trying to position itself on another level. But like many ambitious projects, the reality was more complicated. Under the hood, it offered different options, including a turbocharged inline-4 and a 3.0-liter V6, depending on the version. None of them were particularly impressive in terms of performance. Adequate, but not exciting. And that pretty much defined the car, because the TC wasn't a total failure, but it also didn't fully live up to the expectations its name created. Still, over time, it has become one of the most curious and uncommon cars of the decade. A well-kept 1989 Chrysler TC by Maserati typically sells between $10,000 and $25,000, remaining relatively affordable, but increasingly appreciated for its unique story. It wasn't the most powerful, nor the most iconic, But it was one of the cars that best represented a very specific idea of the 1980s, trying something different, even if it didn't always work out perfectly. 1985 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz. And now we return to one of the strongest and most recognizable names in American luxury. Because if there's one thing Cadillac understood perfectly, even in the middle of all the changes of the 1980s, it was how to make a car feel special. And the Biarritz was exactly that. Visually, this car represents a much more refined version of the decade's design language. It's not aggressive like the Trans Am, nor futuristic like the Corvette. It's elegant, but in a very specific way. The body is more compact than in previous decades, yet it maintains very balanced proportions with clean lines, subtle chrome details, and a presence that communicates luxury without needing to exaggerate. And there's one detail that defines it perfectly: the vinyl roof, the carefully finished trim, and that clear focus on comfort. This was a car designed to look good without making noise, but where it truly stood out was inside. Cadillac knew that luxury wasn't just about the exterior. The Biarritz cabin offered extremely comfortable seats, soft materials, refined details, and a driving experience entirely focused on calmness. This was a car to enjoy. No rush, no effort. Under the hood, it featured engines like the 4.1-liter V8, focused more on smoothness and efficiency than outright performance. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. The Biarritz was something else. It was a statement of style. At the time, it represented one of the highest levels of equipment within Cadillac, aimed at buyers who wanted comfort, elegance, and a clear sense of status. Today, a well-preserved 1985 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz typically sells between $15,000 and $35,000, with especially well-maintained examples exceeding that range. 1986 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS. And now the list returns to much more familiar ground, but with a different approach. Because unlike the Corvette or the Trans Am, this car wasn't trying to be the most extreme. It was trying to be something smarter, a more refined muscle car, more balanced. Visually, it had a very particular presence. It wasn't as aggressive as other sports cars of the era, but it wasn't just a simple coupe either. The body kept clean lines with a long, slightly sloped silhouette that gave it a more refined look. At the same time, details like the SS graphics, the specific wheels, and its overall stance made it clear this wasn't just any car. It was subtle, but intentional. And that's exactly what made it interesting, because the Monte Carlo didn't shout, it suggested. Under the hood, it carried a 5.0-liter V8 with around 180 horsepower. Not an impressive number on paper, but combined with its setup and weight, it delivered a well-balanced driving experience. It could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 7.5 seconds, quick enough to feel responsive without losing that more refined character. And that was its strength. It wasn't the fastest, but it didn't need to be. It was a car that blended two worlds: a bit of luxury, a bit of performance, and an aesthetic that fit perfectly with the decade. It also had something very important: cultural presence. This model was highly popular in its time, especially in the United States, appearing in television, racing series like NASCAR, and becoming part of the collective identity of the 1980s. Today, a well-kept 1986 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS typically sells between $20,000 and $50,000, with especially original examples reaching even higher values. It wasn't the flashiest, but it was probably one of the most honest cars on this list, and sometimes that's exactly what makes it special. 1989 Cadillac Alente. And now we arrive at the car that closes this list, and probably one of the most ambitious of the entire decade, the Alente. Because this wasn't just another luxury model. It was Cadillac making a direct attempt to compete with the best in the world, but not from the United States, from Europe, and that alone made it different from the very beginning. The Alente was designed and partially built in Italy by Pininfarina, one of the most important names in automotive design. The bodies were manufactured there and then transported to the United States for final assembly. That process alone made it something unique and also extremely expensive. Visually, it took a completely different approach compared to the rest of Cadillac's lineup in the 1980s. It was lower, more compact, with clean lines and proportions that brought it much closer to a European roadster than to a traditional American car. It didn't look like a typical Cadillac, and that was the point. The clean front end, the balanced silhouette, and the lack of excess made it one of the most refined designs the brand produced during the decade. It was elegant, but modern. Inside, the car maintained that luxury focus, but but with a more technological presentation, incorporating digital elements and a more contemporary feel compared to other Cadillac models. It was clearly a step toward the future. Under the hood, it featured a 4.5-liter V8 producing around 200 horsepower. It wasn't a pure sports car, but it delivered a smooth, stable driving experience. Exactly what you'd expect from a luxury convertible. But beyond the numbers, what truly defined the Alente was its concept. It was a car that tried to change the perception of Cadillac, make it more global, more modern, more competitive. And although it wasn't a massive commercial success, over time, it has become one of the most interesting and distinctive models the brand ever produced. Today, a well-preserved 1989 Cadillac Alente typically sells between $20,000 and $45,000, becoming increasingly appreciated for its unique story. And now, after seeing all these cars, one thing becomes very clear. The 1980s were not an easy decade. They were a time of change, experimentation, and often risky decisions. Some designs didn't age well, others were forgotten, but some achieved something much harder. They created a true identity. And in a decade like the 1980s, that was everything. Now I want to hear your opinion. Out of all the cars we saw today, the futuristic Corvette C4, the iconic DeLorean, the brutal Buick GNX, or even the refined Cadillac Alente, which one do you think is the most beautiful of all? Let me know in the comments, because it's always interesting to see which type of design connects most with each person. And if you enjoyed this journey, I recommend the video currently on your screen, where we explore the most beautiful American cars of the 1970s, a completely different decade, with a much more fluid, more elegant style, and a design philosophy that contrasts entirely with what we've just seen. Click Continue the journey through the evolution of American design, and I'll see you in the next video.